is there still a bit of juice in facing Chip Kelly, or is that completely worn off?
I think average Duck fans really have a soft spot for Chip. He brought us to some places that the Oregon fans had never been, never even dreamed of going. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, we didn't think we were ever going to get back to a Rose Bowl. And here we go, and we go to multiple BCS, Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, whatever the case may be. So, yeah, there's a lot of love for Chip. There's also kind of maybe some resentment from some fans that think that he should have stuck it out. But when the NFL calls, you got to go. So I have no hard feelings against Chip. And I kind of think that his offense, even though it's still potent, it's nothing like it was when it was at Oregon. He was really doing some avant-garde stuff that people have kind of caught on with a little bit. And I think that you still have to play football. You still have to have power. You still have to have good technique. And sometimes it feels like there's some of those aspects missing with Chip's offense, where he doesn't necessarily go with the power. He may not look at exactly the technique because he's just going to try to outrun you. But he's had some success. Last week's game against Cal was pretty impressive. Cal came into this season as being one of the higher ranked teams in the North, and obviously had a tough time the first week with COVID. They had a game canceled. Then they had to switch it up, and they had to play against UCLA, probably not prepared. Again, like you said, 48-hour notice on that game. But Cal did not look good in that game against UCLA, and UCLA looked really good. So I think Oregon's got their hands full this weekend.
I think what Chip Kelly accomplished at Oregon, now since he's failing at this point at UCLA, had a couple of rough stops at Philadelphia and San Francisco, that it's been a bit lost nationally, looking back now that it's been almost 10 years. But anybody go back and just look at the records. It's astonishing. 33-3 in the Pac-12 over 4 seasons, finished in the top 5 every season. BCS championship game, came within a field goal, final seconds of beating Auburn to win a national championship. Just set up, obviously, it for a 2014 national championship game run as well. What he accomplished there was amazing. And now just the thought process of, how ahead of the curve was he at that point? Is he somewhat outdated, or just another football coach now, and everybody's doing what he established or helped to establish? And it's kind of fascinating because I've looked up a few things since we did some UCLA pregame and postgame last week against Cal, and now with this game against Oregon, looking into his tenure and what he did. And it's interesting to note that the Eagles and Niners, quickly after he left, both go to a Super Bowl as well. So Chip Kelly still at UCLA, off to a decent start, got knocked around by Colorado in the first half, came back and made it a game. And then they, as Rian pointed out, against Justin Wilcox's program, which I've got a lot of respect for him. He does a great job at Cal. UCLA looking impressive in that one. Everybody talks about the college football playoff. We've got to address it, even though I think it's completely just consumed the sport, unfortunately. Yeah. But considering what you achieved, and that you came down to a game against Arizona State in upset fashion from getting to a playoff last year, that being the goal this year, the Ohio State game's taken off the table. But the conventional thought is that Oregon, really a Pac-12 team, but the candidates are Oregon and USC, would have to go undefeated. How much of a mindset is that for Oregon fans?
I think there are a lot of fans that are kind of national championship or bust. Like you said, I think it's kind of consumed the sport. I think there's a younger fan base that's like, hey, if you're not in the playoffs, you're not really relevant. And then there's kind of the older group that loves the bowls, loves all the pageantry of all the different bowls and opportunities for different teams to end the season on a positive note. I think that's the best part about the bowls. It's hard with the playoff that it dominates, especially something like the Rose Bowl out here historically, West Coast. That's our goal. That's the granddaddy. That's the greatest thing. And so last year it even felt like there was some kind of, a cloud over that a little bit because it should have been in the national championship. Well, hey, you tell that to us when we were in Pasadena on New Year's Day having a great time against Wisconsin. I think we'd rather be there. But there are a lot of, like you said, a lot of fans who've kind of been consumed by it. I think the first thing first is you got to win your games on the weekend. You got to win your conference championship. And then you can have something to say. The last couple of years, the Pac-12 has not been the best team in the conference or in the country, obviously. Maybe they're the fourth, or there's a conversation around fourth, fifth, but they're not in the top 1, 2, 3 spot. with the Big Ten's play, with the ACC, with Clemson, with the SEC, obviously. So, this year, unique opportunity. The way the Big 12 started looked like the Pac-12 might have an opportunity to get themselves in there. And then you got schools like Notre Dame or BYU or other schools knocking on the door. So I think it's really important that, this year, if USC runs the table, if Oregon runs the table, and then USC can play Oregon in that Pac-12 championship game, at that point in time, that's where maybe the conversation then shifts to, hey, well, what about a playoff? Chip Kelly used to say it best. He said, keep your head down all year, and then at the end of the year, look up and see where you stand.
And if we could get into the hearts and minds of individuals, then we could really know what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is going to approach this as. Meaning, if they're taking perception into account and the eyeball test of the Pac-12 is taken a step back over the last several seasons, then yeah, you're already behind the 8 ball or have 2 strikes against you based on playing less games and having the perception that you're the worst or second worst conference. But if they take it as is, you basically have to take all the conferences as equal because they're not playing each other. So there's nothing to base it on. So you basically have to take the conference champion as who's playing the most dominant football against its own conference and select the teams that way if they're taking 2020 as is unto itself.
I completely agree. I mean, that's why I love your top 25 list, because, you say it's the truth. It's who played who and who beat who. And it's not just all about perception or numbers. I mean, perfect example is I kind of think right now from the outside looking in that they're either kind of try to put 2 SEC schools in there or put Notre Dame and Clemson in there. What happens if Notre Dame, Clemson play in the ACC championship and Clemson wins? So, I mean, you're in a situation where, a lot of things are up in the air. I just think that the Pac-12 was really behind the 8 ball, like you said, going into it this year. It was very, very evident that as soon as the Pac-12 wasn't playing, the rest of college football didn't care. And, they wanted the Big Ten as a part of it because they want Ohio State. They want a part of that, but they really didn't care when the Pac-12 said they weren't playing. And so that was pretty evident. Obviously, to us on the West Coast, this is what we care about. We'd rather see the Pac-12 than watch SEC or ACC. No offense to those conferences. This is just a regional situation, and this is what we're interested in. But I do think that Oregon has a real shot at being a consistent contender as long as you continue to have these high-ranking recruiting classes. Again, Cristobal's recruiting classes, every year Cristobal's been here, are the highest recruiting classes of all time at Oregon. So those got to coincide with some wins. Again, we talked about Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly had great numbers, but never really had the recruiting classes to keep the thing rolling. This is totally different. Cristobal's got a completely different level of recruiting, and recruiting at a different level physicality as well. Really transfers over to being able to play against Ohio State or being able to play against an SEC school. The way that Cristobal set this thing up, the strength and conditioning program at Oregon, is completely different than it was during Chip. And people used to talk about that, the fact that they couldn't line up against Auburn face-to-face or couldn't line up against some of the bigger schools like Ohio State face-to-face. I think now it's an opportunity where as long as Oregon does what they need to do on the Pac-12, they should at least be considered at the end.
The Pac-12 still paying the price of Washington getting knocked around in the 2016 playoff and USC by Ohio State and Notre Dame in 2017. That was 3 and 4 years ago. My goodness. Mm-hmm. All right. Ryan Winter, Super Chat 503. Please check out his content on Oregon football over there right here on YouTube. Ryan, it's always a good discussion. Appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate what you do. Keep the faith, man.